Today, we're going to talk about how to sell B2B without being a sleazebag. You are in the right place if you are trying to build a business selling to large organizations, and you want to sell in a way that fits with your cultures and your values. So a little bit about me first. So when I started selling, sales culture was really based on this general idea was that you could say specific words, speak in a specific way, and you could persuade people to do things based on these techniques. And there's a big focus on positive thinking, and lost sales was simply due to the fact that you had poor sales technique and nothing else. I learned the hard way that although there were some good techniques that came out of that really what I think of now as old school way of selling, I realized that a lot of those things that I'd learned didn't work everywhere and needed some adjusting. So I had to unlearn the tacky stuff. And I realized that the best way to be effective was actually for me to sell authentically and to connect directly with people in a way that made sense in a real human way. So I got rid of the tacky stuff and taught myself how to sell in an authentic way. So what do we mean by authentic? Let's start there. Well, what I suggest you do is take a moment and just think about a time when someone sold to you and that was a really great experience, something that you really thought, yeah, wow, that was a pleasure to do business with those people and I feel good about what I bought. And what I'd like you to do while I'm talking to you here is to keep that experience in mind, because that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming to give people that feeling, that sense of, yep, that was great. I feel good about this. That's our goal. And the good news is you don't need to be this guy. A lot of people have negative ideas about what selling is. We get them from movies and TV and all sorts of different places. And that can be consciously or subconsciously. But selling is not about being pushy or sleazy. It's not about trying to convince someone to do something they don't want to do or to buy something that they don't need. So what is selling then? What is selling? Selling at its simplest is about solving challenges for customers. That's all it is. We want to understand a customer's challenge and help them solve it, ideally with our product or solution. It's also about taking your customer, your potential customer, from that point of interest when they first say, yep, I'm interested in that, tell me more, to a positive outcome for both them and for you. Sales is a conversation. Each interaction we have, we aim to move the conversation forward. And what do we do in conversations? We ask questions and we listen to the answers. Sales isn't a magic formula. It's a process that anyone can learn. You just need an understanding of the mechanics and a toolkit to help you. So what do you need to start selling B2B? Well, you need the understanding. So you need to understand how it works. You need some basic skills and you need some tools. And that's what we're going to get started with right now. So let's start with the difference between sales and marketing, which is, I think, something that trips a few people up. At its simplest, marketing is one-to-many. So if you think about when you're doing your content out there on LinkedIn or you're putting out emails to a lot of people, you're sending out a lot of information to many people. Now, with technology today, that can be very personalized. That's true. We can really target it, but it is still a one-to-many conversation. We're still communicating out from one person to many, or one organization to many organizations. Sales, on the other hand, is one-to-one. So when we're talking about bigger opportunities where they may have longer sales cycles, and we'll touch on that in a minute, we want to engage one-to-one with people within that organization. And our sales engagement is directly with that one organization. So traditionally, marketing would help fill what we call the top of the funnel. So you see the funnel here, we've got a lot of things in the top of the funnel, and then we move down and gets less and less. So it's the shape of a funnel. That's why we call it a sales funnel. It's as simple as that. Traditionally, marketing helped fill the top of the funnel. We got leads and we put them into the top of the funnel. And then sales would take over when someone showed some interest, and that's what we would call a lead. And then sales' job to close out that lead. Now, there's still a lot of businesses that work this way, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. That's the sort of traditional way of working. However, some of the really good businesses today, what they do best is sales and marketing work together. So with all of the great technology today in digital marketing, there's a lot of really good ways that marketing can support sales right through the sales journey all the way through to the end. It doesn't just have to be digital though. Marketing might be the ones organizing the events to bring those warm leads to. Marketing might be the ones that are helping with sales material that's really helpful for the sales team. And salespeople, and I would always say this when I was managing sales teams, really good salespeople don't rely on marketing for their leads. They'll go out and do their own networking, their own prospecting, and work together with marketing right through the funnel, right from the beginning. We're here talking, though, about B2B sales, so business to business sales, and that is different to transactional selling. So if you're paying something that's $50, $100, or even a couple of $1,000s, you're more likely to research that online and then want to go and just click on something and have it delivered to you, or do your research and then just go and buy it when you're ready. Okay. Just pick it up off the shelf and take it home. When we're talking B2B sales, it is different, and that's what we're going to touch on now. So what are those differences? Well, the first one is that very often in business to business sales, they're just bigger. they're bigger in a way, so in dollar value. And that means that they're a bigger decision for people. They're more complex. The actual product that you're selling, the solution that you're selling is often more complex. They can have longer sales cycles. There's usually multiple people involved in decision making, and you can also have to navigate some internal processes. So let's start with this first one. Sales are bigger. So B2B sales are typically bigger in dollar value. So what does this mean? This means that you can invest more because the dollar value is much larger. Therefore, you've got more time and more resource that you can invest in each individual sale. So business to business sales are often more complex. So when we're selling into other businesses, often what we're selling is more complex in that it has more moving parts. So back when I was selling software, there were often lots of things that needed to be configured. I might need to understand how it's going to integrate with existing software or work on the hardware that they had. There's a whole bunch of things that would go into understanding how what I was selling would fit into the organization that I was selling it to. And that's often the case for business to business sales, even if, for example, you're selling chairs. So if I'm an individual consumer and I go to the shop, I'll look at a chair and I go, right, I'll buy that. I like that, I'll buy it. If I'm buying chairs for 100 offices, that's a bigger decision. I'm going to be thinking about more things there usually. So regardless of what you're selling, once you get into that larger space and into that B2B world, often things are more complex and we need to take that into account as well. And these two things combined often mean that it is a longer sales cycle. What that means is from that point of interest, from the time someone says they're interested until we actually get a closed opportunity, so they sign an agreement or we get a purchase order, that time is longer. So when we're buying something individually, it's transactional literally. So I'll click on the button and I bought it, right? It's a very short time frame. I might do some research ahead of time, but generally it's quite a short, fast decision. When things are larger or more complex, it will take time for people to get all the information they need and for us to do all the things we need to do to take them on that journey for a decision. And a sales cycle is simply the time that it takes. That's what we mean by that term. So how long does it take? Well, it can be simply a few weeks. Sometimes it can be as little as a few days, but it can be anything from a few weeks to a few months. Really big deals might be 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. But usually you're in the sort of weeks to months range. If you're not sure to start with a rough 3 months and then work your way back from there. So what does that actually mean? Well, if we've got a longer sales cycle, a few weeks or a few months, we need to manage that time. We need to make sure that we're actually working towards the outcome in that time and not just spinning our wheels, not dragging things out, and also not trying to rush through and miss things so that we're not getting the deal in the end. So managing that timing and what we do in that timing is really important in B2B sales. We need to be able to keep on track with long sales cycles. So we need to know where we're up to, what we're doing now, what we're going to do next. And as a founder managing a business, you also need to know if you've got a few different deals on the go, when are they going to close so that you can forecast and manage your cash flow, and if you need to report up to investors. When we're selling B2B, there are almost always multiple people involved in the decision-making process. So what that means is, again, if I'm buying something myself as a decision maker, I make a decision, I pay the money, I'm done. But if I'm selling into an organization, there'll be multiple people that will have input as to whether that actually gets signed off and purchased. You'll have what's called a champion. So your champion is the person that's really going to help you. They're usually the first person you've connected with, not always. And they're the ones that are really keen on what you're doing. And they're going to help you navigate the internal workings of that business and hopefully help you get things over the line. Then you've got what we call influencers. Now, by this, I don't mean social media influencers. I mean people that are going to influence the decision in some way. So if, for example, I was selling in HR software to an organization, there might be multiple people in that organization. So there might be trainers that are going to be using the software, that they may not be decision makers, but they could have a heavy influence on what's chosen. And then we've got what's called a business decision maker. So they may or may not hold the budget to sign things off, but they might be the ones that have said, I need you to check that this fills all your requirements for your day-to-day business before we purchase it. So they're often people that can say no, maybe not yes if they don't have the last piece, which is a financial decision maker. So this is the most important one. So if you don't have connection with the financial decision maker, the person that owns the budget that can sign off what you're selling, then you won't get the deal, generally speaking. So we need to understand who all these players are, connect with them as much as possible through that longer sales process and bring them all along that journey so that we can get the positive outcome for them and for us. And then, of course, we've got internal processes. Now, if you're selling into government or highly regulated industries, these can be quite convoluted. In others, maybe not as much as you might think. Often you might have the 3 quotes thing. It might be that there's multiple levels of sign off in an organization, or you might need to be a listed preferred supplier, something like that. So you need to understand what those processes are, not get defensive about it, and help your champion. Your champion will help you navigate those to get that positive outcome. So how do we do all of that, right? So that's understanding what we need to do, but how do we do it? How do we go about doing that? Well, we walk through a structured process. We take our interested party and we guide them through a structured process. So why a process? So often people will say to me, things don't work that way. Life is not linear. Sales are not linear. Things move around. That's absolutely true. But it definitely helps to have a structure to work to. The goal is to always keep things moving forwards. And then you can more easily know where you're up to and what to do next. So when you sit down and go, right, I've got to do some selling today, right, what have I got to do on this opportunity to move it forward? And we talked about those longer sales cycles. If you don't have any kind of structure, if you don't know where you're going next, that can be quite tricky. So knowing the steps that you need to work through to get to that positive outcome is really, really helpful. This is the process that I work to. So we start with prospecting, identifying leads, then move through to qualification. Qualification is the piece, if you're new to B2B sales, you might have missed. And this is where we decide if we want to sell to them. And there's 3 key things that we want to check here. Firstly, do they have enough money for what I'm selling? Am I connected with the right person who can actually make that decision? And thirdly, do they actually have a need for what I'm selling? So qualifying their need. So the third step is discovery. This is where we capture all the information we need so that we can go back with a really great solution. So we need all of that information so that we can make it really relevant and specifically for the customer that we're talking to. And this is one of the key differences in B2B sales. Because it's one-to-one, we always want to make sure that they feel like they're being spoken to one-to-one and that we're having that one-to-one conversation. Once we've got all that great information, that's when we go back and present our suggested solution, which if you're in a software world might be a customized demo. If you're doing something else, it might simply be a presentation. In the physical product world, it might be showing them your actual product. Then we have what's called objection handling. Now, actually, objection handling happens all the way through, but it happens more at this stage. So once we've actually shown them a solution, that's when we get all the questions. And at its simplest, objection handling is just that, the questions you get, but they're more specifically the questions you get or the things that come up that are stopping somebody from moving forwards. So it might be a misunderstanding, it might be more information they need, it might be something that they don't like about your solution and you need to have a conversation about that. And we want to draw those out so that we can address them and keep working through those with them. And then we get to proposal. By the time we get to proposal, there shouldn't be any surprises in there. So we should have had enough discussion with the customer and then with us about what's the right fit so that when we come back to them and say, here, this is what we talked about, isn't it great? They're ready to give us a verbal yes. And when we get to that verbal yes, we move into what's called agreement negotiation. Now, depending on the organization, this can be shorter or longer. And again, some of these things will overlap some of these steps. This is where we might get into a legal review or a more detailed agreement review, go through procurement, things like that. And then, of course, we're closing it out. And what you'll see here is that once we've gone through all of these, that a lot of the work is done at the front end of the process. Yeah, and that's where we're actually doing the heavy lifting. Despite what you might see out there online about close, 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 when we're selling bigger opportunities, when we're working bigger opportunities with people, the early work is more important because what we're actually trying to do here is just move people incrementally through small steps. So we're not trying to get them from that point of interest to make a big jump, generally speaking. What we're trying to do is let's just go to the next step and the next step and the next step so that by the time we get to final agreement negotiation, everybody's on a path. We're all pretty clear what's happening here. And it's just a simple next step to get that actual formal sign off. So once you've got a process like this in place and you would adjust this for your own organization to make it fit for you, you can really understand each step, how to move through through the customer journey. And you as a founder and working that opportunity know what to do at each step of the way. And you can build out customized set of tools for your business for each step of the way. And what we're trying to do here is make it really easy. So we're trying to know what we're doing at each step of the way so we just jump into it and it starts to become second nature for us and for the business. And we then just keep iterating and improving that as we build our business and we see our effectiveness at each point of the process improve and improve. So what can we start doing right now? If you've jumped on here and you're like, right, I get this, I've got that, but what can I do right now? I need to get some sales in. Well, let's get started. So the absolute golden rule is to believe in what you're selling. And that is a really easy one for you as a founder because you wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you didn't believe in what you're doing. So you're 80% of the way there. I also really believe that questions can be really powerful. So when we're in conversation with people, and sales is a conversation, using questions helps to engage people in conversation and it opens people up, right? So if we're saying something to someone, They can take it or leave it as a statement. If I'm asking them a question, I'm engaging with them and it draws them towards me. So questions can be really powerful. So what sort of questions do we want to use? Well, open questions can be really good for discovery. So as we said, in discovery, we want to open people up and get them talking. So how do you currently? Can you describe? What is the process for? And open questions generally can't be answered with one word or a yes or no. That's how we know they're open. So they're sort of inviting expansion. Closed questions can be really great for qualification. I might have an organization that only works in Sydney, Australia. I might say, are you based in Sydney? And they say, no, I'm in Melbourne. Okay, great. So it's a very yes or no question, or a specific answer, a one-word answer. Now, closed questions can shut the discussion down, and sometimes that's what you want to do, but they're not great for discovery, right? They're not great for opening up. You'll find yourself probably more often using open questions, and that's a good habit to get into. If in doubt, use an open question, get the conversation going. We can also use questions to lead the conversation. So asking good questions enable you to lead the conversation where you want to go. So if you've ever been at a party and someone's been talking in your ear and you're like, how do I get out of this? Or how do I change the topic of conversation? The best thing is to ask a question the way you'd like the conversation to go. And that's a really easy way for you to just simply gently move things in a specific direction. And remember, when you're selling, when you're out there having conversations and we're guiding people on this journey from a point of interest, we're the one in charge, right? We want to lead people and guide them along. They don't know where to go. We're the ones that are taking the path forward. So what other questions do we want to ask? When we get into those conversations? Well, we want to start by asking a lot of questions about the problem, the challenge that they have that we can solve. And if you do that, if you stay focused on that, that's probably a really good rule of thumb, especially in the early stage of the sales process. So what this does is, rather than us talking at them about our solution and what we do, we're getting them talking about the challenge and how we solve it together. So that's a really good focus. So asking them questions about that and really understanding what their challenges are as a business, but also for them personally in the context of that as well. And we don't just ask broad questions. What are the problems in your business? We ask them specifically around what we know we can solve. So ask them around the specific problem or challenge that we're looking to solve for them. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get them talking about it rather than us telling them about it. Again, another good rule of thumb. So when we're wanting to engage with people, a good rule of thumb: in person is always better for personal engagement. Video call where you can see someone's next best. Phone call is also good, and text or IM. Email is good for getting out to lots of people. There's a lot of good ways to use email, and I would include LinkedIn direct messaging and that sort of messaging in this. But it's really one way, wait and see. Once you send out an email, you're waiting for them to reply. So ideally we want to, because we're in a conversation with people, encourage forms of communication where we can actually have a conversation. In person is best, video call is next best. So make them a human interaction. Have a goal for every interaction. This is a really good, easy way to keep yourself on track. So you might sit down and go, right, I've got to make a bunch of calls today. I'm going to send a bunch of messages. I'm going to go out to a networking event, whatever it is. When you're in that conversation, give yourself a little goal. And it might be as simple as, I'm going to see if I can get a meeting. It might be as simple as, I'm going to find out who the decision maker is today. Yeah, just something that helps you to build that picture and keeps moving things forward. Remember, what's in it for the customer? So we spoke about getting them to talk about their challenges, but for an individual, that can sometimes be different to the organization that they're a part of. So remember to keep that in mind as well. So say, for example, you might be selling in something that you know is really good for the organization, going to save them a ton of money, make things better on a bunch of levels. But the person that you're speaking with, in the back of their mind, they're thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to create so much work for me implementing this. So always remember to keep the human in front of you top of mind as well, and be addressing their personal concerns and objections as they come up. Adjust your language to the people you're with. When we're in our own space, we can get really used to using a lot of words and jargon that make sense to us, but may not make sense to the people that we're speaking with. So an example might be, if I meet a new founder and I'm telling them all about B2B sales, if I started using words like prospecting and qualifying and sales funnel, and if that's not a world that they've been from, they may have no idea what these words mean. Often, sometimes when I first meet new founders, they may not have even heard the term B2B. And so explaining your acronyms, understanding, helping people to understand what you're talking about is really important. But most importantly, just think about who you're with and adjust your language to make sense in the real world for them, and try and avoid jargon. Listen to the words they're using and use similar words to what they're using in their world, in their industry. So these are all simple things that you can learn to do. As you can see here, there's no magic sauce. It is just simple things that you can learn to do and practice. And that is something that I really encourage all of you to do, is to think every call, every meeting that you have as a practice, as a training session. So after every meeting, After every interaction you have, reflect on what went well and what didn't, and then you can continue to learn and improve. And we're always looking for forward movement. Sales is a proactive thing. We want to be moving people from that point of interest and taking them on a journey, that positive outcome. So every interaction, we're wanting to be moving things forward, and be clear on your personal aim for that conversation and be action focused. When in doubt, when you're sitting there going, I'm not sure what to do, what do I do? Just do something, have a go. Sales is an active thing. And I can tell you that a lot of sales is just getting out there and speaking to people, having conversation. So you will miss 100% of the shots you never take. So make sure that you get out there, have some conversations and give it a go. So I have a bunch of free resources to help you get started. There's downloads, there's articles, there's a B2B sales readiness check to see where you're up to in your process. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and I run free webinars on a regular basis. So jump on and check those out.